Hey team, it's amazing to see you all online with us. Meeting up with our NeoLife family first thing on a Monday morning is a great way to be starting our weeks. And the goal of these coffee and shake break sessions is to connect as a community and to use this opportunity to help our NeoLife distributors get trained and increase our product and our business knowledge so that we are more prepared to go out and add value back into the lives of others. And right now, gut health is a big and relevant topic. So we are going to get straight into it this morning to give our very special guest speaker, Dr. Andre Comrie, as much time as possible. Now, Dr. Comrie is a successful NeoLife distributor and very active in the NeoLife mission to make this world a healthier and a happier place. She's a doctor of immunology and has immense knowledge around the subject of nutrition and our products. Before we kick off today's session, I've opened up the questions and answers panel. So if you have questions as we go, feel free to click your Q&A button and post your question. I'm going to ask you to keep it as relevant as possible to the topic of gut health. And if we have time at the end, we will interact a little bit and get some of your questions answered. Dr. Comrie, welcome to the call.
Hi, Drew. It's great to be with you all.
Good to have you with us. Now, before you get started, I'm going to ask you a favor. You have an incredible story and journey that I really think could be of value for people on this call today. So can you first share your story with us before you get into your gut health session?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you all. And aren't we privileged to be able to meet even although we're all in lockdown? Excuse me. My journey with NeoLife started about 30 years ago when I was, in fact, given a late-stage cancer diagnosis. My children were very young at the time. They were 8 and 5 years old. And you can imagine the shock it was to my husband and myself. And it was very important that something happened to get me through this diagnosis and be cured. I went through the whole medical treatment. I had major surgery. I had chemotherapy that went on for over a year. The doctors said they were going to give me the strongest doses that were available, and they hoped that my body would withstand the negative impact of that treatment. And then I had radiation after that. So I traveled that whole journey. And what was important to me was not to pay attention to what the doctors were doing, because I knew that they were pumping poison into me. I'd actually seen cells under a microscope dying when that particular product was put into the petri dishes in which they were growing. I'd done it myself in a laboratory. So I didn't need to know that information because it wasn't helpful. But what I did want to do was to find some support for my nutritional status so that I could come through this in the best way possible. I knew from my training that a healthy body requires all the tools that we get from our nutrients. And if a body has got everything it needs, it's able to fight diseases, including cancer. And so for whatever reason, the food that we were eating, which I thought was a full balanced diet, I was very conscientious about that, was not providing enough for me. So I went on a search to look for supplements which would support me. And they needed to tick a couple of boxes. One was that they needed to have been fully researched. I was a research scientist, and it mattered to me that that was done. And the other box that needed to be ticked was that they needed to be natural rather than synthetic. And I was very, very grateful to be introduced to NeoLife. It wasn't called NeoLife at the time, but my sister-in-law told me about these products that she knew about. And they did, in fact, tick the boxes, and none of the others that I'd looked at were able to do so. And so I started taking products, as I say, about 30 years ago. And the rest is history. I got well. I know that they were impactful in my healing journey because people who were being treated at the same time as I did and that I knew beyond the treatment did not make the 5-year mark. They were considered a success in the medical paradigm, but 5 years was not enough for me to raise my 8 and 5-year-old children. So here I am 30 years later, still using NeoLife. It's changed from being a life support to a life insurance policy for me, and I love to share what I know about the product and the life-giving benefits that we get from it. So from that basis, we're going to launch into something that usually isn't spoken about in polite company. So forgive me if I say words that you don't like, but we're going to talk about gut health. Drew, can you start the slides? So I just like that picture. It pleases me. So next slide, Drew. The gut in scientific terms is called the alimentary canal. And that goes from the mouth at the top to the anus at the bottom. So the mouth is orange, the anus is blue. And if you think about it, it's a hollow tube. It's got a funny shape, and it's folded into all sorts of folds because it is very long and it just couldn't be straight and fit into your body. But it is open at the one end and it is open at the other. And fundamentally, what happens is that food enters at one end, it's processed down the alimentary canal, nutrients are absorbed from it, and waste material is got rid of at the other end. And for a long time, it was just thought that that was the role of the gut. And in fact, even when I was undergoing my treatment 30 years ago, that was more or less what was thought about the gut. So at that time, one of the most important nutrients that was understood as being essential for the health of the gut was fiber. Now, fiber is not really a nutrient, but it plays a very important role in our health. So there are two kinds of fiber. There's soluble fiber and there's insoluble fiber, and they play different roles. And so let us talk about insoluble fiber first, and that is the fiber that basically acts as a broom or a brush that washes down the whole alimentary canal and makes sure that the waste material is pushed out at the other end. And so the little circle on the right-hand side is a diagram of what the insoluble fiber is supposed to do. It is supposed to keep the gut clean. And so a clean gut has got that open passage, the blue part, and it is able to take the next load of food in, process it, collect all the, absorb all the nutrients, and then that waste material must be pushed out. And that is what is done with the help of insoluble fiber. But there's another range of fiber, which is called soluble fiber, which also plays a very important role. And so if you turn to the diagram at the top left, you'll see pictures of the stomach, which is that basically a kidney-shaped structure. And that orange little ball is the food that enters your stomach. And while it is in the stomach, it absorbs water. And that is the job of soluble fiber. So it absorbs the water and it swells. And that little blob of food swells into a bigger and bigger blob of food. And that is very important because the food is now held in a gel-like substance, which creates a slowing of the digestive process. So you don't, in fact, get the huge amounts of sugar, for example, going into your bloodstream immediately. There is a slowing effect in the absorption, and that keeps your blood sugar levels a little bit more balanced. And it makes sure that there's enough time and space, if you like, for the gastric juices to do their digestion. So then it moves out of the stomach, which is an acid environment, so certain digestive processes happen there. And as soon as it enters into the small intestines, which are the light pink areas in the diagram in the middle, it changes from an acid environment into an alkaline environment. And in the small intestines, oh, that's great, Drew, yes. In the picture on the left is a blow up of what the inside of the small intestines look like. And you can see that the wall of the small intestines look like little lumpy things. Those are called villi. And that basically increases the surface area of the gut and gives it more area for working and absorbing the nutrients. Now the nutrients have entered into the small intestines. They are in this ball created by the soluble fiber, and the sugar and the cholesterol and the fat are held separate. They are not so rapidly digested. The process of digestion is slowed down, and the capacity to absorb maximum nutrients takes place. So the two types of fiber are extremely important. The one as a broom and the other to make sure that digestion and absorption of nutrients is as effective as possible. And if you look at the diagram on the bottom right, you will see what happens when you have a diet that has the correct amount of fiber. The mucus layer, the picture, the little one on the left of the two, has got that pinkish layer on top of the cells. That is a mucus layer which is secreted by those cells, which protects them, and that is intact, and the gut is functioning normally. Whereas if the fiber is not there, or is there in too small quantities, that mucus part isn't there, it disintegrates, and so the bacteria that are living there and the food and everything else that is moving down the gut causes damage to those cells. And so you get an unhealthy gut, and as we will see in a while, unhealthy gut leads to an unhealthy body and an unhealthy everything else. And so the soluble fiber is very important for the bacteria that are living in the gut, because it forms basically a food for those bacteria. And so they thrive when soluble fiber is present, and they are then able to protect the gut lining, as we'll see. So we need both types of fiber. And the big problem in the modern diet is that it is really short of fiber of either sort. Actually about in the 1970s, I think, which is more than 30 years ago now, 50 years ago, a man was looking at the digestive health of people in Britain, which was very poor at the time and probably still is. And he was looking at the effect of sufficient fiber in the diet, and was finding that the average British diet was very low in fiber. And as comparisons, he went into Africa, and he went to various tribes that were still living in their normal old tribal ways. And he looked at their diets, and he found that they were very high in fiber. And they were much healthier than the British people. They were robust in health, they were fit, they were strong, and their digestive health was way better. And he measured what is called transit time. Now, transit time is the time it takes from when food goes into your mouth till when it comes out at the other end. Basically, it's how long it is in the system, both for digestion and elimination. And he found that in the African people who were eating the traditional diets, the transit time was about 9 hours. So basically, they went to the bathroom every 9 hours, or 9 hours after eating, shall we say. Whereas in the British people, the average, I'll ask you to just guess what it is. It's 9 hours in the African people. Guess what it was in the British people. I'm not going to leave you guessing for very long because we don't have time, but it was 72 hours on average. which is just terrible to think of. That means that on average, the British people weren't getting rid of the food that was coming in at their mouth for something like 3 days. It was sitting there, so their digestive systems were sluggish, and you can imagine what goes on in a sluggish digestive system, which is not being cleanly emptied on a regular basis. So fiber is super important. Next slide, please, Drew. So where do we get fiber from in food? The soluble fiber is found, as you see listed there, in dried beans and lentils and pulses and so on, peas, oats, barley, apples, citrus fruits, and some other things. But that's a fairly representative list. And insoluble fiber is found in whole grains, beans, green beans, potatoes, cauliflower, and nuts. And so just think to yourself how much of those particular things you eat on a regular basis. On average, in a modern Western diet, which most of us are eating, people ought to be getting up to 35 grams of fiber a day for a healthy gut, and most of them are getting way under 20, even on a good day. So just give yourself a kind of 0 to 10 score on what you think your fiber intake is. And if it is less than excellent, you really need to do something about it. So this, of course, is where NeoLife comes in, because they offer us a couple of solutions, because it's not always easy to make the changes in the diet that allow it to be richer in fiber. There are 2 fiber products that are designed as sources of fiber. One is called multi-fiber blend, which is a powder, and it can be used very easily. It can be added to shakes, it can be added to baking, it can be added to your cereals and so on. And then if you prefer, there are fiber tablets which provide fiber in a tablet form. And both of those contain both soluble and insoluble fibers. Many of the fibers available in the chemists and so on are actually just the insoluble fibers. So psyllium husks, for example, will certainly supply you with insoluble fiber, but it does not supply you with much in the way of the soluble fibers, which you've seen are super important. And then there are a couple of other products which also contain fiber. NeoLife Shake is very good from that point of view, because in every serving of the shake, you're getting additional fiber. And then there are the NeoLife bars, which are rich in fiber as well. So if you are short in fiber, please make an effort to improve it. You can do your own test as to whether you are short. You can do your own elimination test. And the way in which you can do that is to choose a day when you can eat some beetroot, and eat quite a lot of beetroot, and then see when the poo, excuse it, see when your poo comes out beetroot colored. So the beetroot acts as a dye to your poo. And if that takes longer than, say, 9 hours after eating it, then you are definitely short of fiber. If it doesn't take longer, then you might be getting enough fiber from your diet. So just be aware of it. You will have to do a little personal experiment. You needn't share the information with anybody, but you can tell whether you yourself need fiber or not. Now, 30 years ago, when I started on this journey, I did start taking fiber, and the reason for taking fiber was that chemotherapy causes damage to your, well, to lots of things, including the health of your gut. It damages rapidly dividing cells, which the gut cells are, and it also seems to interrupt or affect peristalsis in a bad way. And peristalsis is the movement that happens. It's like a squeezing movement that travels down the length of the gut and pushes waste material forward until it goes out at the other end. So if peristalsis isn't working very well, you basically become constipated. And so when people are on chemotherapy, they might very well need additional fiber, as I did. So I think the next slide will just help with that, Drew. So here we have a diagram of constipation, basically. And so you've got the small intestine, and then eventually the food moves into the large intestine, which is the red intestine there, and must come out at the other end. And when a person is constipated, the efficiency of the movement of the waste material out is reduced, as I've already mentioned. And so the time that it takes to get rid of feces is much longer. And that is really bad for your health, because feces basically is putrefied matter. And the longer it stays there, the more toxins are likely to be released from the feces, and they get into your bloodstream. So it does become toxic to you if you do not eliminate the waste. The old hardened feces, which haven't been brushed out by the broom-like insoluble fiber, get stuck to the walls of the gut. And so that is also not healthy. It affects how you are able to absorb nutrients. And it also would obviously narrow the diameter of the gut, because if the walls of the gut become coated with a sludge, if you like, then the hole down the middle, the passage down the middle, is much reduced, and the effectiveness of everything is reduced. So it's extremely important that the health of the gut be maintained. And if for whatever reason the health of your gut is compromised, in addition to the fiber, you might want to use a product called Stage 6. Stage 6 is a very gentle plant-based laxative, which loosens the waste material, makes it a little bit more able to move down the passage, and it also is able to improve the peristaltic pumping motion of the muscles of the gut, which move the waste material out at the other end. So this is a very good product. You probably won't need to take it indefinitely, but it certainly is a very good product to get things moving if there is any problem with the movement of waste material out of your body. Again, nobody needs to know whether that is your situation, but if you feel it is, it's well worth taking some Stage 6. Next slide, Drew. Okay, now 30 years ago, when I was starting out on this nutritional supplement journey, there was no talk about gut bacteria. Obviously, people knew that there were a lot of bacteria in the gut, but they were basically considered to be fellow travelers that made no contribution, either good or bad. And certainly the idea that you might have to do something about looking after the gut bacteria was not on the cards. And it is now in the subsequent years, up until the present time, become one of the major areas of research, because it is now being understood that these bacteria are not just, they don't just happen to be there because it's a nice place for a bug to live. They actually are very important to our health. And if we were sterile inside, we would die. We cannot live without these bacteria. So there are some interesting fun figures about it. One is that if you were to take all the bacteria out of your gut, and you were to take the DNA from those bacteria and measure it, weigh it, you would find that you have more bacterial DNA in your body and on your body than you have DNA of your own cells. And that these bacteria come into you from your mother at the moment of your birth. You're sterile, probably inside the womb, and during the birth process, you are infected, if you like, with the bacteria from your mother, And that is the start of your own population of bacteria, which will see you through to the end of your days. And it's important that those be healthy. Now, one of the things that you've got to understand is that if you are getting if your children are getting the bacteria from their mother, then the mother's bacteria have to be good. And so if you've got people that you know who are pregnant and who are about to give birth and hopefully are giving birth in the natural way, then just chat to them about the possibility of doing something about the health of their own bacteria, because that will in fact affect the bacteria of their children for the rest of their lives unless they do something about it. And the other thing is, with cesarean sections being so very prevalent, those babies are born sterile out of the mother. They don't, in fact, get inoculated. It's not infected. We say inoculated by the mother through the birth canal. They pass from the mother to the hands of the physicians and the surgeons and so on, and they are fundamentally infected by bacteria that have nothing to do with their mother. And many of those children they are now finding are the kids who grow up to have asthma and all sorts of other far worse conditions, possibly even things like ADHD and autism, although that's a whole different conversation. So it's important that those cesarean born children actually get an inoculation of much more healthy bugs than they are possibly picking up from the hospital environment. So let's just take a look at why these bugs are so important. These are, we'll talk through this. It's a little bit dense, but I had to borrow someone else's slide. I can't make these slides myself. But let's just look at what these gut microflora or these bugs actually do for us. Starting from the left, they have protective functions. Pathogen displacement. This means that if you are fully populated in your own gut with good bacteria, then pathogens or disease-causing bacteria don't have a place to live. They cannot get a foothold in the gut of a healthy gut. It's a bit like society. When a society is healthy, it will always have a few bad eggs in it, but the majority of the people are good and the bad eggs can be controlled. Whereas if a society starts shifting where there are more rotten people doing bad things than there are good people, or the balance shifts towards that, then it's very difficult to keep control of crime and so on. The same is true in the gut. When you've got the really good guys happy and content and being well cared for, then the bad guys don't have a chance to set up shop. The good guys compete for receptors. What that means is that they are attaching to some of the receptors on the gut lining and preventing bad things from attaching and causing havoc with the gut lining. And they are also, the good guys are able to produce antimicrobial factors. That means they are toxins against other microbes, and they actually fight the enemy in that way. The good guys are called commensal bacteria, meaning they are working together with you and they protect you from the bad guys. In terms of their structural function, they in fact form a barrier of protection for the rather delicate gut wall. And so when the food and everything else that is comes into the gut, these guys are saying, okay, we're protecting the gut lining. We'll allow you through if you are desirable, and we won't allow you through if you're not. They cause the production of a particular antibody called IgA, which is obviously a protective agent in the gut, and that helps look after the health of your gut. They actually make sure that the tight junctions are kept tightly closed. Now, I'm not going to describe that right now. We'll talk about it in a little while, but just hold that thought. They tighten the tight junctions, and they promote the development of a healthy immune system. And so the gut is sometimes called the second immune system of the body. And then they also perform some metabolic functions. They actually control the differentiation of the gut cells. That means they help them mature into functional cells, and then they slough off, and the new baby cells come along and they help those to mature. They help to metabolize carcinogens that come in through your diet. That means that cancer-causing agents are destroyed by these bacteria, and they don't get access into your system and do their dirty work. They also synthesize some of the vitamins that we need, mostly B vitamins. Biotin and folate are two of the B vitamin family, and these bugs actually synthesize those for us. They also synthesize vitamin K, and that is a very important vitamin, but we don't need to supplement if we've got a healthy gut. They ferment non-digestible dietary material, stuff that we ourselves can't digest, and they also take care of the mucus that develops over the surface of the gut lining. We've talked about that before. They help with the absorption of metal ions. Those are essential elements, minerals, and so on. And they make sure that maximum energy is harvested, if you like, from the food that we get. So they are really, really important. They are not just sitting there using up food from our sources and having a holiday. They are there working very solidly in our favor. Next slide. So what happens when all this isn't working well? We get something that is called leaky gut, and you might have heard of that. So on the top line, there are various things that irritate the gut. Stress is one of them, and we know that we all suffer from stress for one reason or another. I think a South African who lives a totally stress-free life is a unique, rare being. Love to meet some of them, actually. And right now, of course, there are added stressors as we are in the lockdown period. Toxins come in, toxins from the environment, toxins from the food, and so on. We could have a whole talk about the toxins that assault us. There are food particles which have to be looked after, controlled. What happens to them? Can they be allowed through into the system or not? We have medicinal drugs, which all have an effect on the health of the gut. We have pathogens, which are the disease-causing bugs that come into the system, and then organ malfunction, which we won't pay attention to now, but if you are going into some sort of organ malfunction, everything is going pear-shaped. So when these things are bothering our gut, we get inflammation in the gut. And you've no doubt heard that inflammation is really bad wherever it happens, unless it is a very short-term process, just dealing with a short, sharp injury where it gets healed and everything goes back to normal. But with all these stressors, we are probably in a situation where our gut is in a pretty inflamed condition a lot of the time if we don't take care of it. And on the left of the diagram of the gut wall, those cells with the little fingers sticking up from them, are cells that are tightly stuck to one another. There are three of them, tightly stuck. And those are cells where the tight junctions are tight. They are being held together to make a solid wall, if you like. And most of the time, the gut has got those tight junctions held together. But sometimes when the situation is bad, those tight junctions loosen up and the gut wall becomes porous. And so you can see the arrows going from the outside of from the inside of the tube, shall we say, of the gut, which is the side on the upper side, through the gut lining into the other side and into the bloodstream. And if some of those things get through, they cause damage, which we'll talk about in a moment. I just want you to notice that the cells of the gut wall are only 1 cell deep. It is extremely thin. And so it's very easily damaged. And it is an amazing organ because it has this fiber rubbing through it. It's got stuff scraping down the digestive tract the whole time. And those cells get sloughed off or rubbed off, if you like, and new ones are developed all the time, growing up from the bottom. But it is only ever 1 cell deep. So you've got to respect that, because from the onslaught of all those things that you put in your mouth, it's a very, very important organ that we need to respect and look after. So if the gut gets inflamed and those tight junctions open, then things get in. So you can see that those purple shaped things, those are toxins. They can get in. Pathogenic bacteria can get in. Food particles that are still too big and have not been fully digested can get in. And that leads to food intolerance, because the body, once it gets into the bloodstream and it hasn't been properly digested, the body says, well, what on earth is this? I don't recognize it. It shouldn't be here. And it mounts an immune response to it because it looks like the enemy. And so you start getting an immune response to food because it has not been properly processed before it enters the system. And that is what leads to food intolerances. And when all these other things get into the system, your immune system is on very high alert. It's called in to help save the situation. And the way it does that is to set up inflammation inside the body. And then you've got chronic inflammation set up, which leads to probably all the other diseases that your body manifests. So it's extremely important that one protects the gut from developing leaky gut. Next slide, please, Drew. So the other point I want to make is, if you can think back to the very first slide I showed you, which was the outline of the body showing you the alimentary canal. What wasn't on that slide, of course, was anything else, but that isn't all that there is. There is a very, very important connection between the brain and the gut. And the connection happens through something called the vagus nerve. And there is an immense amount of information traveling to and from the brain to the gut. And in fact, the interesting thing is that more information travels from the gut to the brain than from the brain to the gut. And so the gut reads all sorts of things about the environment in which it finds itself, which is the environment that you put into it, and whether this is a dangerous environment or not. And it sends messages up to the brain. And that is what, and we know we know what we mean by gut feelings. We get a gut feeling that something isn't right. And the reason we use those terms is because the gut actually does speak to the brain and says, hey brain, something's not quite right here. I think you need to investigate further and see what to do about it. So starting at the top left in the blue blocks, it says stress, dietary or environmental triggers. So those are the things that the gut is possibly subjected to. And it causes a change moving towards the right in the microbiota, which is another word for the gut bacteria. And those gut bacteria are not happy. That allows the pathogenic bacteria to get a bit of a hold. It causes a breakdown of the gut epithelia, which is the gut lining, and you get the formation of leaky gut, as I described earlier. And And so that leaky gut then causes the production of endotoxins, which are meaning toxins produced within, and those go into the bloodstream, causing an inflammation, which is inflammatory cytokines down at the bottom right. And then those cytokines can, in fact, travel to the brain with the blood, and it can do a blood-brain barrier breakdown. So now the protective barrier from the blood to the brain is compromised. And so you get alterations in the neurotransmitters in the brain, the plasticity or the functionality of the brain, the agility of the brain, shall we say, is compromised. And that shows itself in neural and behavioral changes and mood changes, which include things like depression and ADHD and autism and all sorts of other mental issues. And so the health of the gut and the health of the brain are very closely related. And that explains why the gut is sometimes also called the second brain, because it has such an important role to play in the health of the brain and reading the situation of the environment in which the body is functioning. Next slide. So what do we do about this? Well, we need to make sure that we have got good guys on an ongoing basis. We've seen what can damage it. We've seen that medicinal drugs can damage it. We've seen that stress can damage it. Actually, chlorinated water can damage it. Junk food damages the balance of the good and the bad, because for some reason, bad bacteria thrive on junk food and good bacteria just say, no, thank you, that's not what I eat. And so we are very, very easily damaging the health of the bacteria in our gut. And we have to do something about making sure that it's improved, looked after, and we, in fact, do have a product in the NeoLife range, which is very effective at doing that. Just before I talk about the product, I do want to just add a couple of other things. And that is that we must be very careful about not living in too sterile an environment. At the moment, everyone's buying care left, right, and center, and they're spraying it all over the show. Just be careful about what you spray with care. Obviously, if you are bringing things in from the outside, you want to make sure that you are not bringing bad bacteria and viruses from the outside. So you may want to spray those. You may want to spray your hands once when you come into the house, but actually washing with soap, and LDC is very good in this regard, is better. You don't need to keep your environment sterile. And please, whatever you do, don't use dishwashing liquids that have got disinfectants in them. Bath soaps that have got disinfectants in them and so on. We don't need those things in our lives. And they are just causing damage all the time to our gut, good, healthy gut microbes, because they will be killed by the disinfectants. So we need to make sure that we aren't being too sterile, as I said. And there are very good things you can do which can help with the gut bacteria, and that is simply gardening. Get your hands into the dirt. I'm not saying go down and eat the dirt at all, but just be in the natural environment where the natural bugs occur, and you can make sure that you are, in fact, being more careful about the health of your gut. And there certainly is data to show that kids that grow up on farms are way healthier than kids that grow up in the city these days, because they get fully inoculated with all the good bugs from who knows what, the animals that they play with and the dirt that they play in and so on. Whereas city kids probably have mothers spraying disinfectant all around them all the time. Not a good thing. It's in fact a dangerous thing. But getting back to repopulating the gut, acidophilus is an excellent starting point. It can't deliver all the different varieties of bacteria one finds in the gut. There are, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands of different bacteria, but it provides some really important ones, and it provides a really good dose of them. A tablet, or a capsule rather, provides as many as you would get from 10 servings of yogurt, and that's not your ordinary yogurt, it's the yogurt that's got live cultures in it. 10 servings per capsule. So I don't think there's any one of you out there who can claim to eat 10 servings of live culture yogurt on a daily basis. So it's a very valuable product from that point of view. And the other thing about it is that it has been prepared with a process called enteric coating, which means that it is safe in the acid of the stomach. And it's only when it enters into the alkaline environment of the small intestines that it opens up and releases the bacteria. You don't want the bacteria to go through stomach acid because the vast majority of them will not survive. It's an extremely acid and a very hostile environment to bacteria. And so if you find other probiotics that are not enteric coated, you have to seriously question how many of the bugs actually get to the place where they need it, which is the gut. So acidophilus, highly recommended, very important supplement. Drew, next slide. Now, that's pretty well all I want to say, except that if you feel that you need a kickstart for whatever reason, then a really good place to start would be to do the detox program. It's just 3 days. And in 3 days, you improve the elimination, which means that you clear the bowel of all the stuff that has accumulated there and hasn't been removed successfully. That then takes out toxins from the body, and there are some components of the detox program which actually help pull out toxins from the blood and so on. So that's important. It's got acidophilus in it, so you replace the good bacteria once you've cleaned the gut. You get a boost of energy. It certainly is a good way to get a weight loss program started, and it certainly boosts the immune system. And then just for good measure, it slows premature aging, and I don't think there's anyone who would turn a nose up at that. This talk isn't about the detox program, but just on the next slide, you can see that 3 of the components of the detox program are actually things that are important. We've spoken about them. Stage 6 is the laxative. Acidophilus repopulates the bacteria, and fibre we spoke about. These other 3 support the action of those and just get the kickstart going. So I hope that you've learned something. I hope it's been of value to you. I hope that you've got something to share with other people. And probably a good idea is to start trying at least the acidophilus for yourself and your kids. So all the best, and let's make April count. Thanks, Drew.